Hey folks, Fernando doing our video for the Modern Survivalist, and in this video it's going to be 6 ways in which socialism ruins your life. Now, it's been a little bit of a doom and gloom atmosphere since the election. I get it. I know that a lot of people are pissed. I know that a lot of people are in shock even, but this is what you have. This is what you have to deal with, likely at the very least for the next 4 years. If you want to go into denial, by all means, I've seen that happen more times than I could possibly remember. I don't think it's constructive. I think it's a lot more constructive to actually analyze and acknowledge the situation, and that's how you prepare better for it. So being all depressed, doom, gloom, that's definitely not helpful, but that doesn't mean you're not going to be acknowledging and realizing what's happening around you. That is in fact the way in which you plan and prepare for it and take steps so as to counter all of that. This is something that I wrote about in my first book, The Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse, based on my experience of the 2001 economic collapse in Argentina. Economic collapse, that would be the main point, but it was also a social and a political collapse in its own way. You know, after 2001, what we saw was a rise in left-wing narrative and agenda that was self-defined as a nationalist populist movement of the revival of the 60s and 70s communists that we had in Argentina back in the day. And these were the guys that were now going to be taking charge of things. And I mean, they're still the same damn people are still now. Cristina Kirchner first came, Nestor Kirchner, her husband, then she was elected herself, re-elected, and now she's still the president of the country through her puppet, who used to be her own secretary, now the president of Argentina, Albertítere, which is kind of like a nickname for a puppet. Now, while she's the vice president, but actually the person in charge of the country and actually pulling the strings. Does this sound a little bit familiar? Sure it does. Guys, these things have a way of repeating themselves. These authoritarian figures have a way of perpetrating themselves in power, and they have an entire system backing it up and supporting it, and it's feeding and self-fulfilling prophecies in terms of the more you give free crap away to people, the more you're likely to have some of the more useless, despicable pieces of crap of society backing that system up. You know how this is. Eventually, you will have so much people backing it that they will, they perpetrate themselves in power indefinitely, and you know how this goes. It is very difficult to change once you've fallen for that sort of thing. Not to be sad, not to be depressed. In fact, just try to find the things that you still have going for you, which are a lot. It's easy to go online and get depressed with all of this. My advice, having gone through a lot of this myself for many, many years, is find a way of staying positive. Sure, and I've talked about this so many times, eventually you have to figure out what you want to keep doing with your life, because living this way forever, not a good idea. But going back to the topic of the video, 6 ways in which socialism ruins your life, or even in fact ends up killing people. Number 1, suicide. One of the things we saw after 2001 was suicide rates just went through the roof. And this was very fast. This would be one of those differences. I think that in the United States right now you're seeing a political collapse, a social collapse, and it's going to be followed very quickly by an economic collapse of its own. Because if there's one thing, and there's one thing socialists are great at, masters at, is destroying the trust of the economy that they're managing. They just find a way of making people understand that they're completely useless, and they have no way of creating trust and ability to build businesses and people backing that economy, that currency. The currency keeps on dropping. It's been quite a while actually since the dollar has been on a slow slide down, but it's been that way for some time now, and this is only going to be accelerating. The more money you keep giving away, the more money you throw around as if it's nothing, the less value it has, and the more prices go up. Inflation, even hyperinflation eventually, I think it's going to be more of a slow slide thing with a few bumps along the road, but definitely the trend is quite clear. So yes, these things have a way of affecting people, and job loss, falling from middle class to poor, these things affect people in a very real way, and a lot of people just cannot take it, they commit suicide. Look at how many people have lost it in just a few days since his presidency. The weaker you are, the less strong you are mentally speaking, and this is the kind of thing that it's very difficult to prepare for all of this. I've been talking about this for years. This has been my main topic in the survival and prepper world since the start. And still, you just have to go through this yourself, because if not, it's easy to think that this will never happen here, this only happens in crappy third world countries, no, we're different, no, we're so much better, no, we'll never see anything like that, and eventually one day you wake up and you go, God damn, this is happening here. And that still catches people by surprise, and a lot of people just cannot adapt to it as easily as they thought. A lot of folks in the prepper community thought it was all about building a nice bug-out bag and heading to the mountains when the zombies invaded or whatever crap it was that they were preparing for. This is different. You don't find solutions in some of those 90% of the prepper survival stuff you see around you, especially online, is very much fantasy and very much entertainment, really, rather than realistic. Because if not, it's boring. It's like my damn channel. It's not fun. It's not really all that much entertaining. And I try to mix it up and make it, with stuff that I think are relevant. Reviewing this, that, knives, guns. It's all good. But at the end of the day, is dealing with this crap, and it goes back to this strong mentality and being resilient in the face of adversity, which is what you're seeing now. A lot of folks cannot take this and just go this way. So yeah, number one, suicide is, we saw, I think the numbers went up like 500% in the first year after 2001. It got really bad. A lot of people just ended it because poverty, they couldn't sustain their families, they couldn't put food on the table, job loss, people that were used to always having a job because they're good, hardworking people, and they thought, well, I should have a job because I'm a good, hardworking person. And still, when things go down like this, it ends up, going that way. Number two, stress, very much related to the first one, and you may be thinking, well, it's the same thing. Well, not so much, because no matter how strong you are, stress is still very much a real thing. And I think it's been described like stress is the silent killer. I mean, you probably were brought up, if you're of the same mindset, you were brought up so as to not complain, not bitch about crap, and just put on a strong face and keep going. You can do that, but avoiding stress is entirely different, because you can eat all of that yourself and seem just fine, but inside you're dying. I mean, you may end up getting to that point where you just off yourself. So we go back to number one, suicide. But even if you don't do that, stress has huge implications on your health, on your mental well-being. So even if you don't end up making the last drastic decision, it may end up affecting your immune system, your health in general, in so many other ways. So I'd like to insist on this second point number two, stress, finding ways of, relaxing. If it's meditation, if yoga works for you, whatever it is, never tried it myself, but I guess it works for some people. If it's just hiking and walks in nature, go with that. If it's just watching a movie or doing something you enjoy, or playing video games, a lot of people enjoy it. I enjoy it myself, and it's a quick fix as to, I'm just going to be, shooting zombies or whatever, and doing something that takes my mind off some of the things that are concerning me. Combine that with a little bit of exercise, a little bit with family time, a little bit of introspection, I guess. You want to call it meditation, call it that way, but making that mental exercise. A lot of this is in your head. So making that mental exercise of, I'm going to be relaxing, I'm not going to be snapping back at people around me, because I'm going to be spreading that stress and that negativity in my own environment, even worse, in my own family. So, try to control yourself, try to stay cool with yourself, have fun as much as possible. This is all a lot more important than you may realize. Very strongly linked to three, it's going to be health. So health is definitely linked to the stress level that you're going to be suffering, but combining it now that with the economy and the poverty aspect of socialism, then you have a ticking bomb that is quite serious. So yes, if there's something socialists are great at, is having crappy health for the people that they're abusing, and that's going to be, prices are either through the roof or impossible for you to access proper health care, or even if they have some kind of free health care in a collapsed country, it's still very much useless. And health care in itself is a big topic, and I think that a lot of folks don't realize how complex it is. At the same time, how much easier it can be when you take into account some of the money-grabbing institutions that are backed by political figures that find ways of justifying their own irrational excuses for overpricing things that shouldn't be as expensive as they are. At the same time, they're being promoted as universal free healthcare for all, but at the same time, it is not that for all, and it's not accessible for all. So all of this muddy mess of reality, at the end of the day, is, man, you're not getting cared for as much as you liked. It's either not accessible or it's beyond your budget for whatever reason. When you have these socialist governments, it ends up very likely to be that healthcare is one of the things that ends up going down a lot. And by this I mean, what is it that you can do about all of this, constructively speaking? Well, take care of yourself right now while you still can. Get yourself a doctor check right now, because likely it's going to be more expensive in the future. Especially in the very peculiar way in which all of this works in the United States, where it seems that the more they try to make things accessible, the more expensive they end up being. Reasons? At the end of the day, it's going to be more expensive. Dental, medical checks, anything, do it right now. Don't let that stand. And even as it gets more expensive, it's always better to prevent than to cure problems that have evolved into a more complicated stage. So really do take care of your health as this goes on in the next few years. Get yourself your doctor's check. Get yourself a wellness check, like it's called, I think in UK, call it a well check. Blood test. Watch your weight, exercise, eat well, eat little. Like all of us, you probably eat more than you actually need. That's never all that good for you. But yeah, those three main points: suicide, stress, and health. Those would be the key foundations of getting through this mess. Poverty and malnutrition. So I guess I talked already a little bit about poverty. This would be point number 4. Poverty. One of the things socialists master at is, reducing that middle class and dropping everyone, and themselves, of course, which they're going to be staying in that elite top, but that middle class shrinks and shrinks the more time they stay in power, and people start dropping to poverty. That pyramid starts getting very, very wide. Well, it used to be a little more steep, just gets a little bit more thick in the base of poor and marginalized people. So preparing for this as well, and the way in which you prepare for this is finding side businesses, finding ways of increasing your income. The more the dollar loses its purchasing power, the more money you end up needing. So as to buy the same amount of crap, the same amount of food, and whatever it is that you need, that you used to, now you need more money for that. If you don't adapt to it, you end up being poor. And it may be that you were in an okay level, middle class, upper middle class, and you now drop a little bit to a lower middle class. Maybe that's not the case at all. Maybe you just are very good at creating income, and you find ways of improving your position. You just haggle for a better salary, or you're just making more money by any means, and you just see the opportunities and improve. That is definitely not the most likely scenario for most people under socialism. In fact, for most people, it is just that. You start dropping. Most folks will start dropping from middle class to poor. Even some people from upper middle class, or even higher than that, start dropping into a middle class or lower middle class. Very typical. Happens to 99% out of 100 people. That's what they're seeing. And yes, of course, there's people that see opportunities where, and this is something that I have described as well in my first book, the different opportunities that arise as the infrastructure starts failing, as the government starts becoming more and more crappy at their job. Sure, opportunities do arise, so keep that in mind. But one of the things we saw in Argentina, malnutrition. People that used to be poor. I mean, if you were middle class and you dropped to poor, what happens if you were already poor, already lower middle class. Well, it's even harder. So it's going to be less quality of food, malnutrition, people that sometimes cannot even buy the food they need. That is kind of an extreme, and the United States has a long way to go until you see for real kids starving. You see a lot of other things. You see a lot of malnutrition in terms of obesity. Kids that eat crap, junk food, sugar. That's awful for them. That's the only thing they eat. They've never seen a cooked, prepared meal, homemade meal, actual food ingredients combined into a meal. They've never seen any of that. They just eat crap because it's more affordable, because it's cheaper than buying quality stuff. Of course, if you're smart, if you're educated, which is another aspect of all of this, the lack of education. If you're educated, you probably find ways of making the best out of whatever budget you have. But poor people usually are also undereducated and just don't know how to do the best with the resources that they have. So poverty and malnutrition, number 4. Number 5 is crime. And yeah, crime is a big thing with socialism, and especially in the way it's going down in the United States. This is going to be a huge aspect. Criminals are feeling empowered because they feel that, okay, man, now I have someone that's representing me. Now I have someone in power on my side. I have people that are going to be justifying my actions. So if I go out, steal, rape, kill, it's all because I'm one of those oppressed minority or whatever bullshit they justify themselves with. We've seen this in Argentina, awful results. Criminals just feel more bold. They feel like cops should not be touching me because of my, whatever. And this makes for a recipe for disaster. Criminals feel empowered. Criminals feel that cops cannot do their job, and in many ways they can't because they're not allowed to because of police brutality. And you have a huge element of the criminal percentage of society going out there and doing their best to do what they feel like doing. That's where all of this comes into play. The stuff you've probably been preparing for, a huge aspect of preparing a survival. It's firearms, self-defense. Sure, that's likely to be a lot more important now than it used to be before. I mean, it's always been a thing. Now it's more of that bar it's going up, and you have to be up to it in terms of actually knowing how to use this, actually having had some trainings as to know how to use a firearm for self-defense, actually having a decent gun and not a crappy pocket little mouse gun that's comfortable to carry but awful at actually using. I'll be doing more of these video analysis like I do in my Spanish channel because I think you're more likely to be needing it in the future. But yes, ways of defending yourself. And for a lot of this, guys, I insist, as always, my latest book, Street Survival Skills, is a lot about this, about defending yourself, your family, while things start escalating and becoming a lot more dangerous. This is the book I recommend. If you want to get both, even better, links are always there below. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit different from some of the things that a lot of preppers believed in, fighting it off with blue helmets. No, it's more like the guy next door and his crack addict son coming after you because they feel that now is their time to actually do it. All right, so crime, huge. Last one, 6. And I added here this because this is something you learn throughout history. Socialism usually ends up in genocide as well. And the people that end up being dragged to concentration camps, re-education camps, or being persecuted by secret police and taken to centers where their white supremacy mindset will be erased and re-educated so as to be good little commies. That's the way it ends up happening. And you've seen it, I mean, look at history. History is your best teacher. It happened in every single country where socialism got its hands around the population, got power. They end up doing this eventually. So who's the victim? Who is it that's going to be exterminated because they're enemies of the state, enemies of the people? Well, whoever is not them, whoever is not affiliated with their same political agenda, then you're basically labeled as a horrible enemy. this is already happening right now. When you saw those images of people walking into the Capitol, I saw a lot of black people there, right? So I saw a lot of black Trump supporters walking into the Capitol. Are those black people white supremacists as well? Those two guys that crack me every time I watch them, the conservative twins, are those guys white supremacists? They seem to be black. How does that work? Well, I'll tell you how it works. If you're not a damn communist, you're a white supremacist. It doesn't matter if you're even black. It doesn't matter if you are of a given minority. If you have if you're a homosexual conservative, you're still a white supremacist. And you're anti this and that. You're just labeled as an enemy and someone that needs to be either re-educated so as to get that out of your head, or destroyed. Most likely destroyed. That's one of the things that socialists love doing. So guys, that is basically what you're looking at. It's not the happiest-go-lucky video, but this is very real. This is already happening, and you need to accept the reality around you so as to prepare for it as best as you can. Guys, see you on the next video. Have an awesome day. Take care.